That is exactly what my most harrowing performance of my life sounded like. I was playing in a competition and it was being filmed, and I was playing the BWV 998. It was very well prepared. I foolishly borrowed someone else's guitar for the performance, so my fingers probably felt a little foreign to me. And after months of preparation and getting to the final round of this competition, I completely blanked. Of course, it was music of Johann Sebastian Bach. I don't know about you, but I find Bach's music by far the hardest to memorize. And from that moment forward, I thought of memorization a little differently. And I want to share with you in this video 5 reasons why you might not want to memorize. It's something that I have some personal experience with, obviously, and also I've had a lot of experience working with students in memorization, and I want to talk through some of those. So let's get started. The first reason you might want to reconsider memorizing very quickly and rushing to that as a goal is that memorization tends to lock in an interpretation and it tends to lock in our fingering. Much of the music we learn and we memorize is done so through repetition. So repeat, 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 etc., etc., etc. Just over and over again until our fingers do it without us having to really think about it. Now, where that comes into play and is a bit of a detracts from the learning process, holds us back, is when we get new ideas presented to us. So that might come from a teacher. That might come in a masterclass where they say, have you ever tried up here instead of, to get a different sound. This is not the perfect example for that. A good example of that might be El Sueño de la Muñequita by Barrios. Could be played there. And you could memorize it. So for years you could be repeating like that. Or you could do it up here. And then you might think, oh, that's a great fingering. I don't know why I never tried that in the first place. Here, where we've locked in our fingering for memorization, our adaptability, especially in the moment of learning in a masterclass or a lesson, our adaptability is really diminished. At least this is very distinct, first position, fifth position. But if it's just one little fingering change, then it can really be hard to get that consistently in our new interpretation. So, memorizing things early on in the learning process can mean that we lock in fingerings that we haven't lived with them for a very long. So maybe we want to stay open to change, be adaptable in a learning situation, and keep our mind open for different interpretations. Number 2, the second reason you might want to stay with the music longer and hold off on memorization is that memorization perhaps doesn't mean exactly what you think it means. Often when we talk about memorization, it's muscle memory. It's our kinesthetic memory. So our fingers are on autopilot to a certain degree. And in doing so, we've really memorized pitch and rhythm. However, on a music score, as you well know, there's a lot more information than just the dots, just the pitch and the rhythm. There are tempo markings, accelerando, rallentando, a tempo. There are articulations, staccato, and accents. There's phrasing marks. And then in the instance of a composer like Roland Diens or Philip Houghton, you actually have tons of instructions of expressive moments, tempo markings, even color markings, tone changes. A lot of that can get lost in the memorization process because we're memorizing the muscle memory, what the fingers do, but we're not really memorizing what's on the actual page, of which there is a lot. So if you value the connection with the composer, if there's a lot of detail on the page that you need to sort of live with and absorb and learn over time, that's another good reason you might want to hold off on the memorization process and keep the music in front of you, because that connection with the composer is going to stay and you'll keep connecting with them over time and learning from their instructions, because it's not all going to click right at the very beginning. Point number 3 is similar to that, and that is that, and I've observed this many times as a teacher, over the years, errors can creep in as you learn a piece. So you might memorize it quite quickly for whatever reason. Maybe you're good at memorization, maybe it's an easy piece to memorize. But without that score in place, sometimes we build in strange notes that don't seem wrong on first impression, but they absolutely are. So a good example, I've seen this a few times, is the opening of Capriccio Arabe. And it goes like this. Now that sounds more or less right. If you know the piece well, you're sort of saying, hang on a second, hang on a moment, eine Moment bitte. But really what it is on the 7th fret there. So it's in D minor, this sort of sounds right, harmonics on the 3 bass strings, yeah, it sort of fits. And that's a good example of a mistake that can creep in and stay there for a long time. Now that one is pretty easily fixed, to be honest. It's the opening notes of a piece. But more insidious than that is when you have a note that's been memorized and repeated thousands of times, that's in a thicker texture. Let's say it's in the middle of something like the Allemande. You know, it's a really dense piece. There's a lot going on the right and left hand. And then to change something 3 years after playing it the same way for that long is really a difficult thing. So staying with the score, even once you've memorized it or you feel like you can play it from memory, keeping the score in front of you as you practice will help prevent those errors creeping in. Number 4 is the idea that the score will keep revealing these musical treasures to you over time. I like to think of the music of Bach as a bit of a mirror. It often reflects, for me anyway, where I'm at as a musician at different points in time. Perhaps at one point it's just an achievement to play the music of Bach and it sounds beautiful. And then over time you start to see the connections of the lines in the music and the harmonies and how they interact. It might go from this to this. Where it has a bit more voices and interesting counterpoint going on that you can bring out in your playing. So keeping the score in front of you over the years and months and years that you're playing it will allow you to make discoveries that you're not even trying to make. You just sometimes things pop out at you from the score and little connections are made, little aha moments, which are wonderful. So that's yet another good reason to keep the score in front of you and hold off on the memorization process. Now, finally, I will share a bit more of a personal point, which is that I tried so hard for many years to play all my recitals from memory. I thought it was what you should do, you know, as a young aspiring professional musician. That was part of the process, part of being at that level of playing. But I would put in hours and hours, probably hundreds of hours into these recitals of practice. And I had worked on the pieces, they were ready, I'd thought about the musicality, I'd really worked on them, and there was a lot that I wanted to express with them. However, not only was 80% of my practice dedicated to just memorization, so I could have been doing other things, learning other music with that time, but it was more that I prepared so much and I really could play it very well, but because of memory slips, the performances were diminished. So they happened in random places. I got to this point where I'd really, all the advice you might hear me give, I tried all those things and they just weren't working. You know, I'd written it out, I visualized it. Sometimes it just wasn't working. Maybe there's just too much music for my little brain. I'm one of those mere mortals. Some people have a easy time memorizing. It just comes naturally to them, and that's fantastic. But for me, I really, really tried, and there was always these little things that happened. And while perhaps it was more important to me than the audience, I still felt like it was such a wasted opportunity. So that really set me on a path of just saying, look, if you organize your sheet music, and now we have iPads and foot pedals, if you organize yourself, it's nice discreet on the stage, and you're organized so it doesn't disrupt the playing process, it really doesn't impact that magical vision of a musician on stage with the music coming out of their instrument. It still has that effect. And you don't have to risk diminishing the performance by just these little memory slips coming in and risk diminishing the music that's been written for the instrument that we're trying to convey to the audience. So for that reason, I almost always now play from the score. And honestly, it makes the process that little bit less daunting. There's so many challenges performance-wise for us with performance anxiety and preparation, all these sorts of things. it's one less thing to worry about by having the score in front of us. Now, I will say you do need to develop your reading skills to feel confident in that process. And you would also want to practice with the score in front of you. You can't suddenly decide at the last minute to play from memory or vice versa, play from the score. You need to practice it. But that's something else. I think it's just maybe not worth the effort and not worth the risk of those memory slips to play from memory. Now, all of this is my opinion and my thoughts from teaching and my own experience. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about when you think is a good time for you to start playing from memory. Is it more valuable than I was making out in my argument? Is it more compelling to see someone play from music, from memory, sorry? And is it a detraction for you if someone plays from music? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please subscribe to the channel so we can stay in contact, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.